Welcome to Erupt. Today is Thursday, June 17th. My name is Danny Hoyt. I'll be your moderator for this session. If you're joining us for the first time on Erupt, this is our corner of the internet, a safe space to have honest, real conversations. One of our taglines is "The floor is yours," and I'm excited today because the floor belongs to this guest that's joining us, and I'm very excited to chat with Mr. Gibran Mims. Gibran, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me. Just heard about this platform, but it's super dope. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. The host of the Speak Your Mind podcast, a podcast on race, politics, culture, and life. I love that. All things that, to be honest with you, here on Erupt, we want to talk about as well. So this is a great intersection of, I think, what you focus on in your podcast and the kind of conversations we want to have here on Erupt. I got to be honest. Can I just say this off the top? You're brave, bro. Like, you are very brave, and I respect what you're doing. I mean, to take the kind of conversations that you want to have and that you've been having and be forward with them and to put it out there and kind of inspire people to talk about things that aren't often talked about. You were very brave, and I applaud you. Why is it important for you to be a voice of change, specifically on the topic of mental health?
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate you saying that. I going all the way through college, I cut hair and had a lot of great conversations with a lot of people in my barber chair, and just had very real, genuine conversations, and I've seen the experiences of a lot of individuals in my generation. And I have people that are close to me that struggle with mental health issues. I think we all struggle with mental health issues to some degree at different points in our life. And I think just where we are at right now in 2021 with how prevalent social media is, and just a lot of stuff going on in the world. I feel like being in the house for the last year, I think a lot of our mental health is a little bit damaged right now. But I think it's been a thing. But I know that my experiences aren't like everyone else, but the reason I created my platform talking about all these issues around race, politics, life, culture, specifically from the perspective of Generation Z, is just because I think it's important that we, lean into these conversations and amplify the voices of different perspectives. And that's the reality, is that that's what's going to result in changes and more understanding. And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I love that. We titled this segment "Taking the Stigma Out of the Conversation and Getting Real with Each Other About Getting Help." And so I use the word stigma all the time, but I've never actually looked up the definition of stigma. And one of the words in the definition is disgrace, which I thought was
Mm.
interesting. Do you believe there's a stigma or a disgrace, as it's defined, when talking about mental health?
I would say so. I would. That's a good question. I think specifically speaking from the perspective of a man, a black man, a lot of times we're discouraged to talking about our mental health and talking about our emotions and being vulnerable. And so I do think it's kind of like these issues that we have with our mental health are oftentimes led to us just, or how do I say this? People be like, "Oh, you're just mentally weak,"
Mm.
just suck it up. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like a lot of times we're just discouraged to be vulnerable, especially among men. I think it's a little bit more socially acceptable for women to be more vulnerable and emotional amongst each other, but I think it's something that we really need to address. Is like, it's okay to be vulnerable with each other. It's okay to have issues. It's okay to struggle with mental health. It doesn't make you any less of a man, or you know what I'm saying?
Before we get to how to fix that stigma around, specifically, as two men sitting here talking about this, around men, where does that discouragement come from? The discouragement to talk about it, to be vulnerable, because I agree with you that it exists, but how do we put our finger on where does that start? Why does that happen? And specifically, as you mentioned, in Black culture, that's something that is, discouraged. Help me as a white guy sitting here asking this question understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know exactly, but I think growing up as a boy, you're told that things like boys don't cry, boys are the tough ones, those type of ideas. I think that we grew up with. I think this term that's kind of circulating more these days is toxic masculinity, and I think it's just this idea that we're taught our whole life of what it means to be a man, and I think some things that men are more likely to keep in because of what we're taught, how we're raised. You know what I'm saying? That's how I imagine it best. And then I think when it goes to speaking around specifically in Black culture, I mean, just from friends I have, like I know because I have friends that have mental health issues, depression, anxiety that took that took medicine, that took antidepressants, took whatever it's called, other anti-anxiety pills and stuff. But then I know my Black friends that have struggled with that have been told by their families and discouraged from taking these like modern day Western medicine, all that type of stuff. And it's like, no, you don't really have those issues. And I've seen two sides of the spectrum from white friends and Black friends, and just the difference in culture of how it's viewed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that since you, Gibran, have started taking this on as a little bit of your burden to carry to try to, continue to be a voice for change, that as you've taken on this want to have these conversations and to put it more out front, do you find that the people around you have started to change, that they've, your want to change has rubbed off on them? Have you seen this ripple effect start to happen?
I think I'm just like scratching the surface of what I really want to be able to, the impact I want to be able to make. Like, when I first started these conversations that I've been having, I think, a lot of these are still focused around race. And, I had this one conversation a couple years ago, and it was like just talking about anxiety and depression in our generation. And we had just a couple individuals that struggle from different, forms of mental health issues, but they opened up and talked about it. And I didn't actually I haven't had a chance to revisit that conversation, but that's like, when Leah had reached out to me about this conversation, I was like, that's literally perfect because, over my last like few months, I've been like, I wouldn't say depressed or struggling with like overall anxiety, but my mind, my mental has been like trying to figure things out and at times feeling unmotivated and maybe symptoms of what might be depression. I'm not saying I am, but, and I think, and it was like, for me, I was like, I want to definitely refocus on these conversations. I think that mental health is just as big of an issue in our world today. And so, sorry, long way to answer your question. I don't think I've made that overall impact yet, but I'm just kind of scratching the surface of what I want to accomplish. And I posted on my Instagram, my podcast page the other day, and I was like, if it takes me, like, I'm okay being vulnerable or opening up or telling how I feel, if it helps someone else out. And at times it's discouraging because we have these conversations, and like I've had to think about, like, am I really making a difference? Am I making an impact? And it's like, some people, like my sister told me, is changing one person, like, is impacting one person not enough? So I think you have to kind of figure out what your purpose is, and I just want to make sure I'm approaching it the right way and doing it with all the right reasons, and hopefully down the road I'll be able to have some positive impacts on people's lives.
I mean, just to encourage you for a second, and in line with what you said, it was your sister that said this, right? But just by the simple fact of putting it out there and having the conversations and being a role model and example for real conversations about this is already step one that most people don't take. And so you're already having an effect on people. And so when you say, like, sure, you can set dreams of big overall impact, but you never know how big of an impact you're having, even just with the small and the ripples that creates and the people around you in your world. I'm sure you were probably doing this at your barber's chair before you even realized and started your podcast that you were having effect. So I just want to encourage you to keep doing it, because this is so needed. And again, I say this as a white guy, or it's needed in men. I can't speak to what it's like to grow up in Black culture or red or yellow or brown or whatever culture, that there's different stigmas in each culture, right? But just the simple fact of a man to a man, this is important. I know this is something that even growing up for me in a small town conservative place that's mostly Republicans, and now I live in LA that's completely diverse and different, realizing that it's okay to talk about what we struggle with. All of us have a story. We have things we've had to deal with, and it's relative to the person. I can't compare my story to you, Gibran, and say my story is worse or harder or different, because it's relative to us. But we
Right.
all have a story, and we have to walk around in someone's shoes and understand what it's like to be them. So I just want to encourage you. What you're doing, I think, is incredible. I know I said at the top you're incredibly brave, but I want to. You mentioned your Instagram, so I want to pivot for a second because I watched one of your videos. It's on your personal Instagram, and you started the Instagram by saying you wanted to come on and share a message, and it was a good one. You were talking about a deep question that exists in all of us. When do we believe we've made it? Great question, but you said something. Do you remember this video? It's from like 2020 sometime.
Yeah, I like that one. I had to
So
I go back and watch it myself sometimes.
yeah, absolutely. So a great question, but before you even asked that question, you said something, and I want to talk about this. You said I want to give a caveat. You said, quote, these are not things I'm perfect at, actually the opposite. They are things I'm working on. And so before you even asked that big question of when we've made it, you announced that these are not things you're perfect at. Do you think that's part of step one? Is just admitting I'm not perfect. I may look like I'm put together, I may drive a certain car or wear certain clothes, hang out with certain people, but I am not okay, and that's okay. Is that step one?
I do think that's step one, and anytime I'm on my social medias talking about things and sharing messages, they're things that I'm specifically working on. One thing that I wouldn't say bothers me, but I've tried to steer away from is coming on here and preaching to people of what they need to do to be successful or how to be happy or whatever because we're all working on our own things, and so I think it's just important. If I'm gonna send any message, it's gonna be important for me to let you know that like I'm literally working on this myself, and I'm just telling you this because when I was reading it in a book called The Power of Now, and when I heard that message, like when are you like what is it gonna be that all of a sudden you've made it and you're gonna be happier, and it clicked for me. I was like, wow, like for example with my podcast, like is if you had 100 views, do you think you're going to be happy when you have 10,000? Like, if you think that if you're just waiting to get to a point where you think you're going to have made it and be happy, then I feel like you're just going to spend your whole life because then you get 10,000 views. Now you want 100 and you're never going to be satisfied. So that message is really important to me. But I think it's really it's important that we acknowledge that we're all struggling with things. We're all struggling and growing through things. So that's why I made sure to always put that first with anything I preach on my personal Instagram or podcast.
No, I love that. I love that. I think that's oftentimes, the whole issue starts is with this ego, and specifically in men is like we have this ego, like we're supposed to be put together in the rock and the however we were growing up somewhere in there, we're taught one thing, and it's created to be, or we're told to be this, when really like everybody I know around me, and this isn't just pandemic, was already like struggling with things. Then you add on layers of worldwide pandemic and coming out of it and the anxiety around having conversations and having things put together. And sometimes it's okay to just be okay today, right? And
Right.
so when you have a podcast and you are getting ready for to have one of these serious talks, what's your method? Are you going through what you're personally dealing with? Are you asking your friends? Are you reading books? Like, how are you getting your information on what's happening? Is it self-assessment or is it otherwise?
Yeah, I would say it really depends, but like I create these podcast episodes for I think about what my audience, needs to hear, what the perspectives that are important to amplify. Um, so I think just like I've been doing this series with this school district up in Northern California with some high school students, and I'll just speak to that because it's my most recent work. Really thinking about like what do I want, like what questions do I have for these students, and what do I want to learn about their experience, but also what does our audience, what does a 40-year-old white woman want to, what does she need to know, what does whoever, like I'm not gonna start naming different demographics, but like like just thinking to our audience and like what messages are important and what is the overall goal, and like how companies have a mission statement. I try to approach every episode with a mission statement. What can this conversation spark, and what can it lead to?
Wow. What are you finding in high school students? Are you finding that what their experiences are right now are different than, I don't know how old you are, but I assume we're both out of high school. Can I make that assumption?
Yes, sir.
So we're both out of high school. Are you finding that what kids nowadays in high school are dealing with because of social media and just it's a different generation is different than what we did? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I would say that's the case, man. I think like, I graduated high school in 2016, so 7 years ago, and I think just looking at the how quickly this, like, I talk about social media so much because of how prevalent it is in our lives now, like, and it kind of scares me honestly because, like, I mean, you didn't go through high school with social media. I had social media to some degree, but it was not the level it is now. So it's like I think it's this comparison of our lives, and I talked about this the other day. It's like you could look at me, you could go to my Instagram, and you probably be like, okay, this guy's pretty smart. He's got it figured out. Like he's very positive, this and that. And then you're comparing my like what I'm showing as my highlights of my life, and then looking at your low points of your life and your struggles, and you're comparing those two. And the reality is, man, like that's not the case. And I'm 23 and I'm just figuring these things out. So imagine if you're 14, 15, 16, whatever age high schools are, trying to figure these things out. And on top of that, we see all the filters and the effects and the edits. And I think we're just comparing ourselves and trying to fit a perfect image of, there's a lot of things that like, where's that's affecting your mental more than anything else. And so, for these kids that are just growing up, and I think it's kind of scary to see, the effects. I mean, there's a lot of positives to the social media stuff. Like we're able to do this conversation here today, and
Yeah.
a lot of these conversations that are sparked and encouraged strictly off of that. But at the same time, I think I want to, I did this podcast with those students, but like I actually want to continue to work with them, and I want to be able to like actually speak with specifically young men of color, and try to be a positive influence, a role model. So like maybe actually going out there, maybe having conversations once a month. Something, but like I want to be able to make my impact and try to be a positive role model beyond just having conversations that spread awareness.
Sure. Do you think that that is the age group that where this, the impetus of change really exists? Is that high school age? Is it younger? Is it middle school? What's the age with which this information needs to really reach?
Yeah, I think the change is like Generation Z as a whole. Like, I mean, I'm surrounded with. I think high school is important to start there, but I do think that that maturity coming from like 18 to I don't know exactly where it ends, but I
Never.
think
It
this
never
age
ends.
right. Yeah, never. It might not never end. So, um, but I mean, I see a lot of people, and I just do the podcast and going to college. I've just been blessed to encounter so many amazing young future change makers. Like, I mean, my sister, she's public policy, and then she's starting law school at UCLA
Wow.
this fall. Like, and I know her and a lot of people around her that are very passionate about these things. That's just one because that's my sister, so I wanted to shout her out. But I know a lot of people doing such great work and that are very like truly passionate about the change. And so, I think that we start with them, but I think people they'll mature and understand these things at their own pace. So I'm not like overly concerned about high schoolers, but I do think we don't know exactly the effect it's having on them until this is because it's yeah. So we'll see.
Well, I know we got to wrap up here in just a second, but I want to give you a chance to talk about your podcast, maybe about any episode you have coming up that you're excited about, what you're working on. Pretend like I haven't mentioned your podcast yet, and I want you to plug your podcast.
Thanks, man. Well, the main goal of the podcast is to have conversations around race, politics, life, and culture from the perspective of Generation Z. Really trying to amplify the voices of people in my generation to talk about real life issues taking place. A lot of these conversations, if you go back and watch, have been mainly focused around race, but that's just kind of a sign of the times right now. And I want to continue to talk about those things. I'm biracial, so I have a good understanding and being able to connect to multiple cultures. However, talking about things like me and Danny are talking about today is really important for me. But it's not just me on here preaching. It's really finding individuals in my generation that have valuable perspectives as we all do. Upcoming conversations I have, one I'm excited about. Like I haven't done that. I've been wanting to do it for a while, but back to that race conversation is talking about growing up biracial, like black and white, in racialized America. So that experience I think is very unique, and I think I've kind of just grown up with it. But I think that it's a very unique experience. So that's one I want to have, and I want to have a conversation again about depression and anxiety in our generation, and then kind of just see where it goes. But I'm really excited and just trying to make sure I'm doing it for the right reasons and find the right purpose and stay motivated with it. So
Man, it's
that's kind of
amazing.
it.
Amazing stuff. The Speak Your Mind podcast. I assume you can find it anywhere podcasts are found and downloaded, correct?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Awesome. Well, Gibran Mims, thank you for joining us. I want to encourage you, man. The work you're doing is so important, and thank you for doing important work. I can't say that enough, man. That's amazing. I really respect you a lot for what you're doing.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you for the conversation today.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on Erupt. We'll see you guys next time.